two major cities throughout the world that are commonly known are the city of Paris and New York City. Both cities have come very far from where they started from and have had many architectural breakthroughs within many categories such as their construction systems, materials they have used, and organizational systems. Walter Benjamin was a German-Jewish intellectual who functioned variously as a literary critic, philosopher of work, one being Paris, the capital of the 19th century. Looking also at Rem Koolhaas, a Dutch architect who wrote a book called The Delirious New York. These two people look at the architectural history behind New York and the city of Paris as a whole and try to explain the city's main focuses throughout history. The city of Paris was known by Walter Benjamin as the capital of the 19th century. Benjamin considered Paris to be comprised of many different parts, starting with the iron frame construction. Written in the Exposé of 1935, an illustrated guide to Paris said, "These arcades are a recent invention of the industrial luxury, are glass-roofed, marble-paneled corridors extending through whole blocks of buildings, whose owners have joined together for such enterprises. Lining both sides of these corridors, which get their light from above, are the most elegant shops, so the passage is a city, a world in miniature." The arcades were not only used as decorative structures, but also used to house the marketplace. These marketplaces were closely related to what Charles Fourier called the phalanstery. A phalanstery was a type of building designed for a typical community that was self-controlled to ideally work together for mutual benefit and common goals. The next piece of iron construction for Paris was the World's exhibitions. Within the World's Fair, there were areas for the exchanging of products, entertainment, and an area of play and recreation. One idea that came to play around the time was called the panorama. The panorama was an attempt to be able to see a 360-degree view of a scenic area. One example would be a cityscape. Walter Benjamin also took a closer look at the type of people who mainly inhabited Paris, which were known as the flaneurs. These were people who strolled through the streets of Paris with no purpose but to take in the history of their surroundings, and who often were in search for an escapade. It was within the walls of the marketplace that the flaneurs often found themselves working and bartering. As time went on, Baron Haussmann became the new emperor of Paris and was vastly known as the dictator who called himself the demolition artist. In 1964, he placed Paris under an emergency regimen and focused on securing the city against civil war. By adding large boulevards, Haussmann destroyed many of Paris's streets to make them wider to add barricades. Boulevards, which ran for miles, had side streets that were layered in ornamentation and shortened to make the shortest route between the barracks and the workers' districts. Also, by taking away portions of the residential city to widen the streets, it was his idea to raise rent in order to weed the lower income class out of the urban cities and into the neighboring suburbs. Walter Benjamin said that the inhabitants of the city no longer felt like at home there. They started to become conscious of the inhuman character of the metropolis. In Haussmann's struggle to transform Paris, the city and the community lost much of its architectural livelihood. Also, hundreds of the original iron arcades that were put into Paris as a vast meeting point were soon destroyed. In Haussmann's attempt in creating boulevards, people wouldn't understand the foundation of what Paris has become today and how much focus has gone on the popular representation of French architecture around the world. The way Haussmann cut through the narrow alleyways now make more of a rational design in today's architectural standpoint. This then led the city to have wider avenues and larger areas that made the city's outer perimeter protrude outside the barrier limits and allowed them to expand their limited population. Looking at Rem Koolhaas, he takes a look at the history of Manhattan. Koolhaas calls Manhattan a metropolis, which by definition is a city that is largely dense and has high populated urban areas. New York City was an up-and-coming neighborhood where the area was limited and the dreams were great. Manhattanism, Koolhaas noted, was the program being built that was fabricated by men, and everyone would then live inside a fantasy society. The city block grid was a main focus within New York City during the early 1800s, while the area was broken into thousands of blocks. Manhattan, which was designed on an island, made it that the number of blocks built were permanent and the city could not grow anymore. With this setback, Manhattan's architecture is a paradigm for the exploitation of congestion. After the 1890s, it was the era known as the Machine Age. The Industrial Revolution hit in the 1800s and large advancements were made within the manufacturing field. Two items that really made skyscrapers an architectural icon are the invention of the elevator and the steel frame construction. Engineering made it possible to have both the elevator and steel frame construction reinforce each other, which allowed for the site to be multiplied, while the expansion of the floor space also increased. When the skyscraper was built, architecture was never looked at the same, now being able to build more vertically inclined levels while using less footprint area. There were three ideas that came about for the design of the skyscraper, which are the reproduction of the world, the annexation of the tower, and the block alone. First, looking at the reproduction of the world, before the elevator and steel frame construction were invented, Anything above the second level of occupancy was considered unfit for commercial use, and all those above the fifth floor were uninhabitable. Both architectural highlights within the skyscraper made it structurally work. The annexation of the tower was designed for many reasons, some being to provide a view of Manhattan as a whole, viewed as a symbol of technological progress, a pleasure zone, and what is now indicated as homogeneous patterns of everyday life. Lastly, looking at the category for the block alone, one example that has been built is Madison Square Garden. This building is one of the most widely known buildings in New York City and is located on the east end of Madison Avenue between 26th and 27th, as it sits on a whole block as its footprint. Within this building there lies a theater, concert hall, and also seats a total of 8,000 people within the entire building. Koolhaas considered Madison Square Garden a park within itself. Taking the reproduction of the world, the annexation of the tower, and the block alone, Koolhaas notes, "When you look at what makes the skyscraper, these three categories together are called a glorious whole, in which really made New York what it is today." Manhattan has changed very drastically over the past years, and it has been known as an architectural city icon to millions of people. Being one of the first places to house the skyscraper, other areas of the world can now use this idea as well. The only disadvantage I see within New York City is the limitation of space. Having the East River and the Hudson River surround the city, there leave no area for expansion. Millions of people visit New York City a year. Koolhaas says Manhattan is 21st century's Rosetta Stone. Not only are large parts of its surface occupied by architectural mutations, such as Central Park and the skyscraper, utopian fragments, Rockefeller Center and the UN building, and irrational phenomena, Radio City Music Hall, but in addition the block is covered with several layers of phantom architecture in the forms of past occupancies, aborted projects, and popular fantasies that provide alternative images to the New York that exists.